Welcome. Oh, we're so glad to have you with us. My name is Mfa McCrary, and I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Patty and Jonathan Kraft Chief of Learning and Community Engagement at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. Thank you for joining us in this special new series of conversations between Rosa Rodriguez-Williams, the MFA's first ever Senior Director of Belonging and Inclusion, and staff members from across the institution. We're titling this MFA Voices. The series will offer viewers the chance to hear about the work of various departments. Rosa will shortly introduce her guest today. First, we would like to acknowledge that the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, founded in 1870, stands on the historic homelands of the Massachusetts people, a site which has long served as a place of meeting and exchange among different nations. As a museum, we acknowledge the long history of the land we occupy today and seek many ways to make Indigenous narratives more prominent in our galleries and programming. Over to you, Rosa.
Thank you, Mfa, and thank you to all of you who have come to share the space with us. Thank you for joining in our conversation. My name is Rosa Rodriguez-Williams. My preferred pronouns are she, her, and ella. It is my pleasure to welcome you to MFA Voices. As Mfa says, this is a series that will pull back the veil and go behind the objects and art to spotlight folks across the museum and their work. I'm so excited to be with all of you today and get started on a week that will be filled with fantastic conversation. But before we get into it, let's take care of a few housekeeping things. Portions of the program will be recorded and available as recording later in the spring. A quick note, when the recording is taking place, you are so welcome to turn off your video and mute your audio in order to not be included. And the majority of the recording will only show the speakers. A transcript and closed captions to this program are available through Rev for Zoom. Live captions are available. If you would like to enable closed captions, go to the bottom of the Zoom window, click the up arrow button next to closed caption, and then click on show subtitle to start displaying the Rev line caption. Speakers and I will try to say our name when a new speaker begins to help lend clarity to the transcript. During the session, questions and comments can be shared via Zoom chat or the raise your hand function. And today, as you can see in your screen, it will go quickly, and I'm super excited to welcome Layla. It is my pleasure to introduce my guest today, Layla Bermeo. Layla is the Kristin and Roger Servison Associate Curator of Paintings in the Art of the Americas Department at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. Before joining the MFA in 2016, she curated the Black History Art History Performance Art Series at Harvard University, held curatorial fellowships at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and served as a guest curator at the African American Museum in Philadelphia. She holds a bachelor's degree from Northwestern University and MA from Williams College graduate program in the history of art, and she is currently a PhD candidate at Harvard University. At the MFA, Layla co-organized Collection Stories, Native American Art, curated Frida Kahlo and Arte Popular, and mentored a team of youth curators who developed the new exhibition, Black Histories, Black Futures. In 2019, WBUR, a national public radio news station, named Layla as one of the 25 millennials of color impacting art and culture in Boston. Welcome, Layla.
Gracias, Rosa. Qué lindo verte.
Bello verte, Layla. First, let me just say this, Layla. Dos Latinas, two Latinas here talking to each other about the work that is happening at a 150-year-old institution, which is the MFA. So I am like, this is like a moment, and I'm so happy to share it with you and to be here and be part of it with you.
Honor.
Yeah, so we're gonna go ahead and go through some questions. And my first question for you, Layla, is like, you know, I think for me, it's coming in new, not having a museum background and seeing all these new titles. And I think I'm not the only one out there. But what do curators do, and what is your role here at the museum?
That's a great question, because I think somehow the word curator and curated is really overused and yet still remains kind of obscure. So in an art museum, curators are usually people with advanced degrees in art history or in a related field who connect people with art in the collection, usually through displays, publications, and public programs. When I think about the work that I do, I often think about how visitors, especially those who are newer to museums, might walk in and see our displays, why certain things are on view, why certain artists are more represented than others, why certain objects tend to have more or better or more visible spaces, and assume that these things have somehow been divinely determined, that they've been there for 150 years, always, and they always have to be there. When in fact, in a museum, things are where they are because groups of people have made choices for them to be there. And while curators are definitely not the sole decision makers, we play a large role in what goes on view and why. And so we can think of ourselves as advocates for works of art in the collection. We also have opportunities to create special exhibitions. So the Frida Kahlo exhibition that you mentioned that I organized in 2019 involved works not only from our collection, but also from other collections. That is very typical in a special exhibition. And most of all, we're public educators. This is, I think, part of our job that has become broader and more urgent within the last 10 years or so, as we think about how really being in the business of representation means that the things that we offer and teach and show to our publics have much wider effects within our communities.
Yeah. Layla, what is your story? Like, what is your why, and how did you end up at the MFA Boston?
Yeah, that's such a great question too. So I'm originally from Wichita, Kansas, so right in the middle of the country. And I grew up really in a lower income home, but my parents really valued education, as a way of uplift, as a way to move forward. And they always found ways to expose us to the arts. So I remember struggling financially growing up, but I don't remember actually a time when we didn't have access to museums or to public art. So even if it was the Wichita Art Museum that's on the campus of Wichita State University, where my parents were both students when my brother and I were young, this was something that they made sure that we had access to, and is one of the reasons why college museums will always have a very special place in my heart. I didn't, even with that kind of exposure, I really had never heard the word curator, I think, until I was almost done with college, at the very sort of end of my time as an undergraduate at Northwestern University. And when I learned that it was actually someone's job to help decide what works of art go on the wall in a museum, I knew that that was what I wanted to do with my life immediately, and finished my degree sort of really fast in art history at the end of undergrad. I worked in a commercial art gallery, which, believe it or not, is kind of unusual for curators. And I continued to work in retail and sales as I was getting my master's degree at Williams, and then later working in Philadelphia at the Philadelphia Museum of Art and the African American Museum in Philly, which is where I really developed an interest and a background in Black artists. From there, it was really the Art of the Americas wing at the MFA opened when I was a grad student at Williams in 2010. And this was something that was revolutionary in our field, that a museum would dedicate an entire building, not just to American art of the United States, but really to a department and a space that would be responsible for presenting, interpreting, displaying art, not just from the US, but also from all of Latin America, Canada, including island nations and First Nations and Indigenous communities. This is still a kind of radical thing. We are really still continue to be one of the only departments organized this way. And I think about that a lot because I remember very clearly standing in that line in 2010 that wrapped around the block and waiting to come in and see this brand new way of connecting audiences to American art, of challenging definitions of American art. And so, I always say that, long before I was a curator here, I was a fan of the work that was done here at the MFA. And I consider myself incredibly privileged to continue to learn from the people, especially in my department, Erica Hirschler and Noni Gadsden, who were involved in the building of and the sort of envisioning of this new way of connecting people with stories of American art.
Yeah, what are some of the things that are happening? And I know that are really, really exciting. And also, Layla, in terms of, I know that you helped with Black Histories, Black Futures, and that's one of my absolute favorite exhibitions at the museum. And I would love for you to talk about that and how, your journey sort of feeds into, or sort of there's a synergy there, your passion for your role at the museum, but also sharing the passion of your gift and of being a curator with folks who wouldn't otherwise know what that is.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I think a lot about how I really didn't know what a curator was until I was almost an adult. And that sort of limited knowledge, I think, is part of what prohibits more people of color, more people from working class backgrounds from entering this field, because we don't even know that it's a possibility. And so that was sort of one of the driving forces behind the development of a program called Curatorial Study Hall, which I developed in collaboration with Makiba's team in learning and community engagement, a sort of wonderful way that we see a kind of breakdown between curatorial work and what's been considered educational work, that these two things are having more and more intersections within museums. And the aim there is really exposure and using the massive amounts of skills and talents that we have within the museum to publicly educate young people within the Boston area. So especially, I think, when I was coming up, museum internships were all about making like a mini me. And it's really exciting to be part of a project where it's like, it doesn't actually matter if these young people become curators. It's that we're teaching them how to write better, how to give presentations better, how to express themselves in ways that are going to empower them no matter what they choose to do. And this is, I think, has become a sort of civic responsibility of a large museum like ours, that we're able to offer these experiences, able to empower these young people, able to give them this kind of exposure. Yes, absolutely, to the careers that are available within a museum, but also just to sort of anything that they want to do, to sort of give them skills that will help them no matter what. And hopefully create a long-term relationship with the museum. If they're not all coming in to be curators, which of course we hope some of them will, maybe they'll become members, maybe they'll become supporters, maybe they'll have a sort of lifelong relationship with the museum that is different from the ways in which other internship programs have been designed.
So what are some of the exciting things that are happening or upcoming?
Yeah, so I think from developing Curatorial Study Hall, which led to the exhibition that you mentioned, Black Histories, Black Futures, I've been thinking, a lot about processes of community engagement, how what we can learn again from the Learning and Community Engagement Department within the ways that we present stories in our galleries and in our exhibitions. And one of the most exciting projects that we've developed fully during the sort of work from home phase has been what we call the Translation Project, or Translating American Stories. And this is our very first initiative to bring multilingual interpretation or storytelling. That's usually what we mean when we say interpretation. So to bring multilingual labels and texts and storytelling into our permanent collection galleries. So some of you may know that we've had bilingual interpretation for some of our recent special exhibitions. So Frida, Kahlo, Cecilia Vicuña, Graciela Iturbide, they all had bilingual English-Spanish labels in them. But we've actually never had bilingual or multilingual interpretation in any of our permanent collection galleries. And so this is an initiative to do that, but also to sort of open up the languages that are represented It is true that there are many Spanish speakers like you and I, Rosa, who live here in Boston. But unlike in many cities, it's actually not clear that that is the second most dominant language after English. It's roughly tied with Chinese and Haitian Creole. There are many, many Portuguese speakers, also, as many people know. And so we are representing those 4 languages, as well as Wabanaki, which is a native language of New England, as a way to really emphasize that English is a foreign language in the Americas. And so we're using all of these languages to try to tell sort of fuller stories, unexpected stories, again, about what becomes art in the United States. But I think also to connect directly with our visitors who are coming from these backgrounds. To me, the most exciting part of this project is that we get to work with people like Jasmine, who is down there in the chat. So we are not working with a professional translation company at all, which we have mostly done in the past. And I felt strongly about this because I have seen some truly horrific Spanish translations coming out of professional translators. And that is because they have no idea what, like, maybe they're excellent at the language, but they have no idea about like art museum translation, right? Like it's a very sort of niche thing. And so all of these, we're developing brand new content in English, but also these translations are all done by either MFA staff or community members or artists or people who have some connection to the museum. And in this way, we're able to sort of better open up and tell these stories in ways that are relevant to today's audiences, and also create translations that are really nuanced because they're created collaboratively. Yeah. So we're very, very proud of this particular project, and ways that it might really open up, you know, storytelling, not just for Art of the Americas, but really across the museum.
Yeah, no, I'm excited for that. I mean, I think, you know, when we talk about belonging and folks entering a space and seeing their language, there's a lot to be said there, and I'm proud that this is something that we are working on as an institution, and that you're working on, Layla, with your team. One more question before we go into the chat is, so, you know, it's a challenging time. What are some challenges, or a challenge, or maybe we should say an opportunity, right, in that challenge in these times as we look at the future and reopening? What do you think?
That's a great way to phrase it. It's hard. It's honestly, I think it's probably a good thing that it's hard to think about the challenges without thinking of opportunities. So I would say for curators, our greatest challenge right now is being away from the collection. So having to look at like everything on a screen, not being able to stand in our galleries and have conversations with people is really, really difficult, because that is at the core of the work that we do. At the same time, we have learned so much, I would say, about ways to reach more people and share our knowledge virtually, because we've had to, because of the pandemic. And that has really changed the way that we think about accessibility forever, which is really amazing. And we'll see, I think, the continuance of virtual programs like this one well into the future, as we think about the number of people that we want to reach, and people who are not able to walk through our doors, as we really strive to give them some experience of the museum too. I think there are also many painful anxieties about our colleagues who have lost their jobs because of the pandemic, both here at the MFA and really across the museum field. And to be, you know, quite honest, I think questions of sustainability are haunting all of us. And part of that is because, like, the museum world already has a horrible reputation for fairly compensating people, given the workload and the level of education that you need to enter this field. And so, as in so many other areas, we are seeing existing inequalities that are really being exacerbated by COVID. These, I think, are, again, questions that are sort of going to shape our long-term future, that extend well beyond right now. But even with that, I am encouraged by this sort of outpouring of interest and support for museums, you know, people who are constantly saying how much they miss visiting us, and how art can be uplifting during these difficult times, if only to remind us that there have been challenging times during the past, and that even at times of great distress, we can see great beauty.
And with that, I mean, I think is phenomenal. Makiva's going to help us with some Q&A.
I am. While we're waiting, I have my own questions, so I have to start request in the Q&A. Rose, actually, this is for you, Layla. When you were hearing about Rosa's position being created, and you were thinking about how that role might work with you and support some of the things that you are thinking about, and how you would be supporting that role, can you talk a little bit about what your ideations were and what you think that would look like as we move forward?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I thought immediately of the ways in which a lot of the issues of that have been sort of classified as a kind of identity politics, or sort of related to issues of race or representation or class. A lot of these are, or sexuality, a lot of these are often framed as very like new issues. And in fact, we can find them at any given time in history, right? Like none of this is anything new. And so I immediately thought, I hope that this will be someone who can help us communicate that all of these issues are true in art of the past, in stories of the past. When I found out it was Rosa, I'm not gonna lie, I was really glad that it was a Latina person, because I think that the invisibility of Latinx people really continues to plague specifically arts institutions. So many people are actually aware, I hope at this point, that across the US, but even here in the greater Boston area, Latino people are over 20%. And still devastatingly underrepresented in our own collection. And so, this is something that I think that that Rosa's skill set lends itself particularly well to, sort of bringing out this, like, sort of within larger issues of belonging, this really specific blind spot in the art world, where people, quite frankly, are really confused about who Latinx people are, like how they're different from Latin American people, where the intersections are with Indigenous people, what the X means. And so I think if we can help, and that contributes to invisibility, right? So if we can help sort of elucidate some of these issues, which is not something that, quite frankly, we are prepared to do alone in curatorial. We absolutely need someone like Rosa to help us do this. I think we can make a really lasting contribution together. So could not be more excited.
All right, I'm looking for any questions, because I could keep going. I have tons of them. All right, well, my next question is actually for both of you, which is, Rosa, before you came to the museum, how long did you think it would take for an exhibition to be created and come to life? And Layla, you tell us how long it takes for an exhibition to be created and come to life.
I think that's a great question.
I love this.
I had, in planning programs, you just sort of do them in a few weeks or months. So you're just like, oh, I would like to show this. Let's bring them. So I think that's what's my understanding. And I now know that that's not true.
Right, because curators want 5 years. We want 5 years to make anything, and that is because we want our research to be thorough. We want to know that we're connected. We are finding great ways to sort of connect, especially art of the past, with people today. We want to make sure that we have the resources where, if, I want to bring paintings from Mexico City to the US to show them, that we're able to do that. If we want to make a book, it's actually due a year before the exhibition opens. And so you have to have all of your information and all your storytelling together before that. The Frida Kahlo book is going to be our very first bilingual publication in English and Spanish. So I'll be doing rough translations, but working closely with a Spanish language editor, Susana Reyes, who used to work with us here. That takes time also. So we always want more time, but it is good also to have, I think, the area that you work on, where it's like, things are urgent. We need to communicate with our people right now. and people need us. Some people need us next week, not in 5 years. So, I think Mfa is helping us sort of see where we have to find these intersections with projects, right?
Urgency is always good for everybody. I know. And patience is also a benefit. Oh, we have Maureen's asking a question. She says, Layla, how is the work you're doing influencing the decisions about what gets shown in the Art of America's wing? Are you looking at increasing percentages of Latinx artists shown, prioritizing acquisitions by Latinx artists, doing more with connecting past and present history, and storytelling with people from broader Americas in our collection?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say all of the above. So in terms of the many like questions and confusions about like Latinx, I would say people and histories, I think one, as someone who works mostly with historical art, that is always sort of weighs heavily on me, is that we're all newcomers, but I can actually use my own family as an example here. So part of my mother's family was in Texas before it was the United States, before it was Mexico, before it was New Spain. So we're not all newcomers. So it's a matter, I think, of sort of uncovering some of those long histories, which can be difficult to do when we're working within the limits of our collection. One of the things that has really been a big concentration for our current team right now is moving a lot of the Native North American or Indigenous art out of the space that is on the lower level. That will help us open up stories about lots of different kinds of people, about Indigenous people, about Latinx people, about colonizers, about people who, about entanglements between all of these different people. So that is one major project that, especially with our current research associate, Tess Lukey, we've been able to make some real headway on, and we plan for those efforts to continue into the ways, especially that we represent 20th century and modern art. I also am really interested to continue, working with our curators in contemporary art. Liz Mansell, who many of you know, is a specialist in Latin American art. And then, with some new changes in our Works on Paper department, Edward Saywell becoming the chair, that is one of the things we've already talked about specifically, so people working more recently, Latinx artists being developed, especially in that area where, quite frankly, like Latinx artists, like some of the most important, especially printmakers, I would say in the history of printmaking in the US, and not a story that we represent well. So it's a matter, I think, of doing both, of sort of, finding ways to have these stories emerge in art of the past, but then also, developing our collections of living artists and connecting with our Latinx communities here in the Boston area.
Great. Corinne, I'm going to just answer your question for you quickly, which is that you can go to the MFA's website, you can go to the Teen Programs page, and you can see more about Curatorial Study Hall. And there should be links to all sorts of media that has covered it. Maureen's raising her hand again. We have two other questions after Maureen says something.
So I just, if you don't mind, I just wanted to respond to what Layla was saying. And Layla, I'm chair of the gallery instructors. So I'm coming at this from the perspective of being in the galleries with students and the way in which that we try to weave together stories in the tours that we give to students, and hopefully someday we'll be able to do that again. But it sounds to me like part of what you're trying to do is, rather than sort of the separation that we physically have had in the Americas wings with the, for example, the Native American arts on the LG level, or the Mexican indigenous populations from Central and South America there, and then more colonial history, on the first level, and so on, that you're looking at creating the opportunity to say what was going on concurrently throughout society.
Maureen, we only have 1 minute left before we go offline. I'm sorry.
That is correct, Maureen. Thank you for that.
One more awesome question about advice to educators who are encouraging their students to become curators. Yes.
So, I think that's from Jasmine, right? That's a really good question. So I think, again, as much time as these young people are able to spend at museums with things maybe that are not immediately of interest to them. So it's like, maybe we have a young person who's really interested in art of the Americas, so they come to programs and galleries and exhibitions that we do. But I would also encourage that same young person to go see what is happening in Art of Asia, or in our textiles installations, or in other parts of the museum, because there is there is no amount of overexposure that you can get with the arts. And so I think one of the most important things to do is to sort of push yourself beyond your own interests, because these other topics will inform what you think you're interested in. I can't tell you the amount of people who start out in one field and then move to another late, usually at like in grad school. And so if we can start that earlier, I think that's really, really important. The other thing that is really helpful is language study, which is not one that comes up a lot, but many people who work in museums can at least read 2 or more languages. And this is something that, quite frankly, in this country, we do not value the study of languages the way that they do in other countries. And so that is really, I think, an emphasis, like learning another language, even if it's not perfect, will also open up a sort of range of new experiences, and traveling when you can. But really, I am really excited about the new programs that we've been able to develop with Mfa specifically, that also treat careers in museums like actual jobs that pay the bills, as much as they are also about this kind of intellectual exploration. So I think communicating, that it really is both, that it is a sort of like intellectual job that is also one that I have to use to keep the lights on in my house. So, yeah.
So we promised this would only be 30 minutes. I'm going to let Rosa close it up, because we want you to keep coming back, because we're going to do this for the next 4 days, and we're going to see what you think, and you should make sure that you tell us. So Sophia's going to put a way for you to both follow what the next programs are, but also how to give us more suggestions for who you want to hear from. And Rosa, take it away. Layla, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Layla, you are phenomenal. And I'm so grateful for your time and for sharing your time, talent, and treasure with all of us. And so thank you all for joining us. I hope you'll come back tomorrow for the next session of MFA Voices. Thank you.
It's been an honor. Thank you so much.
Bye.